Hey, I'm Allison. I'm a literacy specialist and I have a website for teachers called Learning at the Primary Pond. And in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 3 time-saving strategies to help you differentiate your primary students' independent work without spending tons and tons of prep time. And this is actually part of one of my goals for 2021. I want to share with you as much as possible strategies that are great for engaging kids and best practices, but also strategies that will really help you save time and energy. If you're joining me, I would love to know what grade you're teaching just so I can kind of get a feel for who is here. And then also I want to share that this is just kind of a mini training. And we are going to be going over a lot more strategies specifically about work-life balance and how to kind of cut back on the amount of time that you are spending on school stuff. Because in 2020, I don't know about you, but a lot of teachers' responsibilities grew. They were doing more work than ever. Depending on what your specific situation was, you might be planning for remote learning, you might be planning for in-person learning. I know everybody's situation is a little bit different, but if your work-life balance got off or off kilter or worse in 2020, I would love for you to just share yes in the comments. I'm just curious who kind of has felt that way, because I've heard from so many teachers who definitely identified with this, and so that's why I'm putting on this mini training and then also a full-length workshop, like I mentioned, in January in about like 2-ish weeks. I put a link for it in this post. We're going to talk about how to get your work-life balance back on track, because that's always been something that has been super important to me and something that I've worked on personally, so I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you. I see lots of yeses in the chat, so lots of people, unfortunately, had their work-life balance just get worse or offset. So I'm really excited to be able to share this with you, but also to share a lot more in that webinar. Okay, so we're going to talk now about time-saving strategies for differentiating students' independent work. And then, I forget if I said this already, but I also have 2 bonus strategies. They're not independent work, it's small group work, but I just wanted to throw them in there because they are definitely time savers and I believe they can help you. Hey Cheryl, so glad you're here this year teaching 2nd grade, way more work with remote. Yes, Cheryl, you are definitely not alone. I see lots of yeses. Okay, so let's see. All right, so we all know that differentiation is important, right? One of the challenging things for me about being a teacher, I work with kids more like one-on-one or in a small group setting now, but in the classroom, we see all their needs and we know that, this child really needs to practice this or this child needs to practice this. And at times it can be painful because we want so badly to give them exactly what we need, but our time and energy is limited. And we know, even though we don't have all the time in the world, some level of differentiation is important. We rarely get a class of students where everybody is just right on the same page and, the same activities are right for everybody. That just doesn't happen often. Differentiation, it's important, but it can take forever, right? And this year especially, like we were talking about a minute ago, this school year is extra challenging. We need to preserve our energy. Let me know in the chat, just with like a thumbs up or something, if you feel like even more than your time being drained, your energy being drained, like you just maybe are really wiped out at the end of the day, whenever your day ends, even if it's later than usual. Just that you don't have, like your cup just doesn't feel quite as full as it might have in previous years. So doing less, of course, is one way to preserve our time and energy for sure, right? It's not that we're trying to skimp out on our jobs. Teachers are such hard workers, but at the same time, we do have to preserve our time and energy and we have to use it well. So that's why I'm sharing these 3 quick and easy strategies for differentiating your independent work. We're going to go a little bit more in depth on each one, but the 3 main strategies are same game, different words. So this is great for practicing phonics, for differentiating your phonics or word work activities. Same writing assignment, different supports, and then same activity, different text. And I'll tell you what each one of these things means now. Okay, so on the screen you should be able to see a couple of examples of games. These are specific games, yes, they're materials from my literacy club, but you can apply these principles to really anything that you're using or creating. So something that I love to do with my students so that I'm not, like teaching one group this game and another group this game. Sometimes it happens, but generally speaking, when they're going off and doing independent work, or maybe even doing independent work at home, I like to be able to teach the rules or the expectations for an activity and then have them all be able to go off and do it, but have them practicing different things. Now, you might only be able to have like 2 options, right? That's still better than having kids practicing words that are way too hard or way too easy for them. Any small amount of differentiation, it doesn't have to be perfect. So in this game, just to give you an example, I'm not sure how big it is for you, but I think I made my slides the wrong size for the screen, but there's these little monster guys, and they have vowels on them for the short vowels, and the kids can either read and sort CVC words. So these are little monster teeth, and they're putting the teeth into the monster's mouth. So like rag goes with the short A, fin goes with the short I. But then you can also have an entirely different set of cards, and maybe they're pictures, or maybe you have some advanced kids and they are reading words with digraphs, with blends. You can have everybody doing this little monster game, but they're doing it with different words. Another great and easy way to do this, you may have some type of like board game or game that you create or you buy where the kids are just moving pieces on the board. You can do something simple as like, okay, they're rolling a die, they are moving a piece, and they're reading 2 words. So group A has this set of words, group B has this set of words, and I will use different colored like folders or little bins to keep the group separate so they know, hey, if I'm in the red guided reading group, I use this. Hey, if I'm in the blue guided reading group, I use this. Now, obviously, depending on what your teaching situation is, that type of differentiation might not work this school year, but file that in your mind for next year. And for this year, what you can do, maybe you're teaching remotely and a group of kids gets the game with the CVC words and a group of kids gets the game with, I don't know, the digraphs or blends or whatever it is. Maybe your kids have dice at school, maybe they have dice at home. There's also free online like dice websites that you can use. Be careful and watch the ads, but just like look for like free online dice. And what they can do, whether they're at school or at home, is you can, this is from the Literacy Club, but you could type up words that you want them to read and trace, or they could be word cards somewhere else, and they just place them on the dice mat, and if they roll a 1, they read this word. If they roll a 2, they read this word and write it. But it's very simple. They're just reading and writing the sight words. They like it because it's got the dice element in there. But again, you teach that game to an entire group of students, and then they're just working on different words. So again, you don't have to go nuts as far as like, I'm gonna have like 5 different ones of these sheets. Like if you have time for that, amazing. But we are really talking about kind of like minimalism here and pulling back a little bit. And so for that reason, I would say if you can do 2 different options, 3 different options, take the games that you already have. It's not like you have to go on and make stuff. You just have to find games that will work for the kids to be reading or, writing different groups of words and take them and modify them. Okay, so Alyssa says, do you have any suggestions for managing games and materials like this when all students need their own materials? So Alyssa, when we're in a situation like this, it helps if they have like a core set of stuff that they have in some sort of little baggie or bin that they can always hang on to. And something that I would always put in there is like a die, maybe like a pencil and a paper clip for doing a little spinner, some cubes. And so that way with a sheet like this, if they each have a die, they can have their own die and they can do, their own thing without touching. For something like this, it's a little bit harder because you end up making more copies, right? That's the challenge. But another thing to think about, your school, I'm sure, has policies for like how long can go between kids touching things, but maybe you just cut out like a set of 5 for some kids, and then they do it 1 week, and then you let it air out over the weekend, maybe even another week, and then, the other kids get it like a whole week later so the germs are gone. Again, I don't know how long your school is requiring you to wait between materials, but just a suggestion, not all kids have to be doing the same thing. You could cut down on your time by just prepping certain sets, and then you swap out the sets over time. It takes a little bit of planning right up front to get everything ready, but then you're basically just swapping out the activities. And I would do this for a skill, obviously not something that they need to work on for like 1 week and then move on. That would be something where you know, it will be a skill that you need them to be practicing repeatedly. I know it's a little bit harder because in a normal school year, like I would laminate this and, you know, or put it in a little page protector, maybe use thick paper for these little word cards. So it's a little bit different, but I think that you can still kind of tweak it. And, you know, go with simple stuff like this for sure. Like this is not the year of having like the absolute best, the absolute most fun games for kids that take hours to prep, because your time is limited. You have all these other limitations, again, depending on where you are. So as long as you bring the fun, I always say like you bring the fun, the kids will catch your enthusiasm, especially at K2. That's why I love K2. And you can, you know, you can make it exciting for them, even if it's not maybe like your favorite way of doing centers. Okay, so we talked about this a little bit, different color-coded baskets or folders for differentiated material. File that one away if you're not able to, you know, have the kids near each other and sharing materials, but that is something that has been really helpful for me. I color code my guided reading groups, and then the baskets or bin match those colors. All right, so tip number 2 or strategy number 2 is same writing assignment, different supports. So these are different writing assignments, just to be clear. But the nice thing about writing is that to me, it's almost self-differentiating. This is a little activity from the Kindergarten Literacy Club. I think it was the December materials, if you remember. But the kids were supposed to decorate a cupcake and then write details to describe what the cupcake looks like and tastes like. Now, at the kindergarten level, there's so many options, right? The kids can color it, decorate it, and then they can label. They can just write labels and that's it. In the club, we provided like a version like this, where it's like my cupcake is blank, and then they just filled it in, my cupcake blank. You could also just provide no sentence starters at all. So this applies, you know, even for first and second grade too, right? The amount of writing that kids are going to produce will depend on how much they're able to. So writing, in a sense, is a little bit more self-differentiating. And the nice thing about it too is that this is, you know, this type of activity is something that kids could do in their house. They could do it at home without touching anybody. And all you have to do is maybe, like for some kids, cross out the bottom. They're not going to be writing, they're just going to be labeling. For some kids, you have no sentence starters. It takes just like, you know, a couple of minutes to put that together, print them out. Some kids get certain copies, some kids get another type of copy, or, you know, you send it digitally. But pretty fast. Writing is great for self-differentiating stuff. Hey Bree, so glad you could join us. Diana from Peru, so glad you could be here. All right, so this is another example of an activity that can be differentiated really easily. Again, Literacy Club materials, but you can pretty much, you know, create something like this yourself. So this is a timeline for beginning, middle, and end. Now with some kids, maybe you can say to them, hey, I want you to write about the beginning, middle, and end on a piece of paper, and they're good to go. With some kids, maybe you give them that same piece of paper, but it's like their sentence starters at the beginning, in the middle, at the end. And then for some kids, they need something where they can like draw, write a little bit. It's a little bit more visual. You can see less is expected because there aren't like a ton of lines for them to write on. So that could be one writing assignment. And how simple is that, right? Like if you're teaching remotely, you read aloud a book, and then the independent activity is to write about the beginning, middle, and end. Maybe you also, as a support, give them a YouTube reading of the same book if you can find it so that they can go back to it. And some kids, again, they can just write with lines and be good. Maybe you want all your kids to do it. That's great. Maybe you need sentence starters. But being able to differentiate the writing activities is really quick. You just add in little things. Yeah, on this next slide, I have just some different writing supports. I don't necessarily always use all of them, but at times, sentence starters can be helpful for some kids. Give it to some kids, don't give it to others. A word bank, maybe like with this cupcake thing, if you are working on adjectives in first grade, you might have a word bank of different adjectives that the kids could then use to describe the cupcake. Very simple, right? Some kids don't need it, some kids really benefit from it. With kindergartners, early first grade, they can just draw a picture, do labels, or they could just write. Kids can draw or write and answer the same assignment or answer the same question. And then in an ordinary year, you might differentiate by having some kids work independently and some kids work with a partner. Maybe you can still do that. I know schools are all doing things differently, but if not, just file that one away for later. All right, so I think this is the third strategy, and then I'll move on to my 2 bonus strategies for small group. So the third strategy is to have them do the same activity, but to use different texts to do it. Okay, I'm going to come back to these little leveled passages in just a second, but I want to give you some ideas. So these are text-based, can't say that, independent activities. One that's great, I would say like first grade and up, is to reread a text several times to improve fluency. Now, if you are teaching remotely and your families are able to be super involved, they could actually graph their accuracy with an adult. And kids, my kids always love to see like, oh, I missed 5 words the first time, but the next time I only missed 2 words, and I love to see their accuracy go up. So graphing fluency, if you're a literacy club member in the 1st and 2nd grade club, we actually have like a graph that you can use to do that. Let me know if you can't find it. But this is a great activity for 1st and 2nd grade, and the graph adds that little, added interest for them, but rereading is just so good for fluency. Another thing they can do really with any text is just to answer a reading response question, right? We talked about that beginning, middle, end, how to differentiate writing assignments. And then another one I love to do is a word or letter hunt, letter for, kindergarten, to work on, like, let's say you're working on digraphs and phonics and they're actually looking in the text that they read. And the text, I should have said this earlier, the text is something that you've chosen for them or they have chosen. Therefore, it is differentiated because it's at their level, right? You can tell everybody in the class, hey, look for digraphs. Hopefully all of your kids would have something that you've given them that would have digraphs in it. Or as they get older, look for parts of speech, look for verbs in your text that you read, and write down 5 examples of verbs. Like, how easy, how fast is that? And it's automatically differentiated as long as they all know what verbs are and can identify some examples. But it's automatically differentiated because they are either choosing or you have for them a text that's at their level. So that's why text-based stuff is so great. And I mean, I could even go on more. Like in a normal year, I love to have kids in like kinder or 1st grade, maybe they read a fairy tale together and they act it out with a partner. Obviously, probably not an option for this year, but there's so much you can do with the books that the kids are already reading or text like this. So text from, you may have another resource for this, but text from my 1st and 2nd grade literacy club, the teachers get 4 different levels per month. So, this is who hibernates. It's the same, more or less the same information. Obviously, the one at a higher level goes much more in depth, but it's the same topic. The lowest kids are reading this, then the other ones are reading this, this, and this. So this is something that a lot of our teachers use in their small group. It is something that can become independent work as well. Maybe you read it in small group and then they read it for independent work. Again, they can do any one of these activities, the fluency, the reading response question. They can do it all with their texts, even though the texts are not at the same level. Other resources I know that have some levels, readworks.org will sometimes have 2 options for a passage. Readworks, I would say, is most helpful for like mid to late 1st grade and up, but sometimes they will have like a step read, and you can download 2 options for free. Readworks is free of that text, and then give it to your kids. It could be small group, again, it could be independent work, but again, you're minimizing your time. You are also, you just have so many options for what the kids can actually do with the text. Heidi, so glad you're here. Thank you. All right, so now we're going to do our bonus tips. Those were just some ideas. Hopefully it got you thinking. I know everybody's independent work activities are different, but just we talked about how to differentiate writing instruction by, we could do sentence starters, we could do a word bank, we could do, whatever else to help the kids, give them options about how much they write or how much they draw and label for kindergarten. Lots of different ways to differentiate writing. We also talked about same game or same activity, different words. Don't have to have a different set of words for every kid, right? You could just print off 2 options and then, differentiate as much as possible. And then the last thing that we talked about was they're reading different texts. That just could be independent reading. It could be Epic. Love Epic. Let me know if you use Epic for remote teaching or just in the class. You could have them be reading the different texts, and then you can have them do something with the text. So the phonics word hunt, the grammar search, all those things that we just talked about. But now moving on to differentiation in small groups, right? So small groups are inherently supposed to be differentiated. And I want to tell you this little secret, and you might already do this. you can actually have the same group of students read the same text in some cases, not all cases, when you provide appropriate supports. This is a time saver because you are basically planning like the core of one lesson, and you're using the same text, but you're using it with different groups. So let me give you an example. With early kindergarten, when they're really trying to crack the code, I don't do this as much. I do it more once they have like the basic understanding of like, this is how phonics works and this is how we blend to read. So this is kind of on down the line, not so much early kindergarten. But anyway, let's say you've got a group of first graders, and I'll just go up to find an example of a text. Like you've got two versions of this text, two hibernates. And of course, not all of your kids are going to be at one of these two levels. But you're like, I want to use this. This is maybe grade level text, or it's going to be challenging for some kids, but I know that if I support them appropriately, they can do it. So some of your kids may be able to read this. This is like a level D. They may be able to read it fine. If they will need support with it, what you can do is you can pre-teach some vocabulary words. The nice thing about printable text is they can kind of interact and highlight. So you could teach hibernate, you could teach hungry, have them highlighted or underline it in the text and practice reading it. Another thing you could do is you could choral or echo read the first half of the text, right? So choral read would be you and the kids reading at the same time. And then once you do that, you release them and they finish reading the text on their own. Another thing you could do is a little echo read. So you read maybe the first 4 sentences and then they all read it together. First 4 sentences, they all read it together. That may be especially helpful if you're teaching remotely. Doing small group remotely can be a little bit challenging, but if you do a little bit of choral or echo reading, it does work okay on like a video chat, depending on how many kids you have, but that is absolutely an option. Now this level, I forget what level this is. It's from the 1st and 2nd grade literacy club materials, but this is a little bit of a higher level, right? Same text, but goes a little bit more in depth, more challenging vocabulary. Let's say you have some kids that are at that level, great. But you can still use this text with kids that aren't quite there yet. Again, you could pre-teach vocabulary words. You could choral or echo read like the first paragraph with the kids. And then by choral or echo reading that first paragraph, you're giving them some of the important words. You're almost like starting to build that knowledge about the topic, and then they can be more successful with the rest of the text. This is great because it exposes them to more challenging text, grade level text, but you're giving them the support so that they can be successful. So not to go too far down a rabbit hole here, but this can be a time saver because you are then having to pull fewer texts for your kids. You're still differentiating. You're still able to, meet their needs. You can use the same text with a group of kids, but one group of kids, you just introduce the text and they're good to go. And another group of kids, you do a longer introduction, you look more at the words, and then they're good to go. Same text, different supports. You're teaching or you're using grade level text to challenge kids even if they're reading below grade level, and it also saves you time. Now, do I do this for every single small group? No, I don't. But especially if you're in a time crunch or you just want to expose them to grade level text, use the same text, multiple groups. Another time saver for small groups is that you can take your focus skill from whole group, what you're teaching in whole group, and you can work on it with your small group, but at different levels. So let me give you an example with character traits. Let's say that in your late 1st grade or 2nd grade classroom, you are working on character traits as a class. And so maybe as a class, you're reading some books, the kids are telling you adjectives to describe what they believe the characters are like on the inside. And you're also supporting the kids in giving text evidence. I think so-and-so is brave because X, Y, and Z. So that's what you're working on in whole group. Now in small group, sometimes you will want to kind of deviate from what you're working on whole group because you're like, whoa, I know this group of kids really needs to work on X, Y, and Z. I definitely do that. But many times you can create continuity in your schedule and save yourself time by working on the same trait, by reinforcing what you're teaching in whole group in the small group setting. So with the character traits example, maybe you have a higher group that they are actually able to read books and they are able to identify character traits and they can give you text evidence. Amazing. During the small group, They write it on a sticky note, they write it on a whiteboard if they're at home. It doesn't matter where you're teaching, they can absolutely do this. So that's your higher group. Maybe you have a middle group who they're kind of catching on during whole group and they can do it with your support. But in the small group setting, instead of having them identify character traits and give evidence by like marking it with sticky notes in the text, maybe instead you just like read the text as a group, or they read it, whisper read, silent read. Then you come back together and you present them with like a list of adjectives, a list of character traits. And you say to them, well, okay, let's read these. Now, which character traits do you feel most describe the main character? Maybe they can pick one or two. Maybe with your help, they can find some text evidence. But you're not quite expecting the same level because that's just not where they're at. You're still working on character traits, but you're just working on it at their level. Now, let's say you have a lower group. Or maybe, maybe they're reading below grade level, or they're really struggling with this skill. It could be that they're even reading on grade level, but this particular skill is just hard for them. So in this case, you could do like what I said, where you give different, options for character traits and they pick some. Let's say your kids are really, really low and they just need to work on identifying characters. So maybe in your small group, you're reading the book with them, and then afterwards they identify the characters. Then after you do that, maybe you guys talk about, oh, okay, well, let's list the things that the characters said and did. And so then on the board, they're telling you the things that the characters said and did. And then afterward, you model, oh, all of this makes me think that the character is brave or the character is kind. And you're kind of modeling for them. So hopefully that made sense. But basically, you're taking that skill from the whole group. You're working on it with your small groups, but you're doing it in different ways. Your high group, you're good to go. You got a middle group, maybe you're giving them options, or maybe they just tell you a trait and you tell them evidence, or you give them options for evidence and they pick one. Your lower group, maybe you're just having them identify the characters, or maybe you're having them help you list the different things that the character did. Same skill, different ways of working on it with your small group. Not only is this good for just, creating continuity throughout your literacy block, but it's also great for saving time, and it's remote teaching friendly. This can really be done wherever you're doing your small groups. All right, so let's wrap up here. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the free workshops that I'm doing that are all about, ways to rebalance your life as a teacher if your work-life balance is off, ways to get organized. I'll tell you more in a second, but I hope that you are feeling somewhat rested after break. Hopefully everybody has had a chance to recharge. I want to remind you that all of this school year is definitely a marathon. It's not a sprint. For the first, probably 5 years of my teaching, I would burn out by October because I was just working so hard. I was basically sprinting at the beginning of the school year. You may have done that. We cannot sprint through the rest of the school year though, right? Like many of us are experiencing more challenges than during a normal school year. So I would really encourage you to keep things simple. You can be effective, but still keep them simple, and also to take care of yourself. So these are some things that I want to share in the full-length webinar. We did go like half an hour here, but I do have a lot more to share. I do this weekly routine that has cut down on my stress throughout the week so much. I always thought that I was organized and I would either have like a paper planner or a digital calendar, and I always felt like I was so organized, but I was still encountering some surprise stresses, or just, my week, like Monday I'd be fine, and then Tuesday I was just kind of downhill. And so I started doing this routine. I learned about it from someone else, and then I kind of tweaked it to make it more relevant for us educators. But this thing that I do, it takes 20 minutes. I do it before the week starts, and it really sets me up for success throughout the week in terms of just not feeling so stressed and feeling a little more organized. I also would love to share with you some small changes that I've made in my own life to have a calmer school day and just like a better, work-life balance. And then the other thing I want to share are some strategies that have helped me make changes that actually last, because too many times I've had the best of intentions in January, started out the year great, and then like literally 2 weeks in or 3 weeks in or a month in, like it was like I never set these goals or never made these intentions. And so I have learned how to build in kind of like checkpoints for myself to make sure that when I say I'm going to rebalance work and life, right? They're never in perfect balance, but we have to have some level of balance. When I say I'm going to rebalance work and life, that those changes actually last. So I have some check-ins that I do that I'm going to share that with you. I'm going to share all of this with you in the webinar. So I would love to do everything I can to help you make this year the year of better work-life balance. I know, as we talked about earlier, lots of teachers have struggled. You are not alone if you have struggled. I do have some free live webinars where I'm going to share with you what has worked for me. Normally I do literacy stuff. This is more just a little bit like life and teaching in general focus, but I'm really excited about them. I just feel like this is the time for them after what we all have been through in the past year. So there's 3-day options, January 17th, 18th, or 19th, all free. Each one is an hour. On the 17th, I'm doing, I think, 7 p.m. Central Time. On the 18th, you may have a school holiday. I'm doing 3 p.m. again Central. You can look up and see what time it is on your time zone. And then the 19th, I'm doing 8 p.m. Central, hopefully to get my friends on the West Coast who are a little bit different in their time zones. All right, I hope this was helpful. Feel free to tag a teacher friend if these strategies about working with small groups, differentiating independent work would be helpful for them. And I super can't wait to see you on the webinars. There is a link in this post. You might have to click like see more or something, and that should allow you to sign up. All right, thanks so much for watching. Take care of yourself, and I hope that 2021 is off to a wonderful start for you.